what's happening in the industry being adopted by governments, both in terms of building codes and various other kinds of regulations, with the goal down the road of net zero. The codes are establishing the standards and, in a sense, leveling the playing field, which is a positive thing. But in terms of the mainstream industry, what we find is that the industry only builds really to the standards that are in place. We cannot really rely on the market to address the climate issue in the construction sector. So what is necessary here is for governments to both invest more in terms of enforcement and also in terms of more broad education about climate change in the industry, and also to address the reality that employers really have not been coming to the table to support what needs to be done in this area. And so there is also a need for governments to have a more serious look at ways in which they can incent or push employers to do more. One of the things that our research has shown is that there is a significant performance gap. A lot of buildings, both new and retrofitted, don't meet design specifications. There's a number of reasons for that. I won't go into them all here, but one of them is that the workforce itself doesn't have the knowledge, skills, and competencies to meet some of the higher standards. And part of this reflects limitations in the apprenticeship and training system. And as I mentioned before, employers in particular are not supporting workforce training adequately. Another thing that's come out of our research is a recognition that the component, the classroom component, that normally 2 months a year that apprentices spend in the classroom over a 4-year period for most trades, it's not nearly as much as we find in Europe for comparable trades. And so there is a question about whether the classroom component is adequate to provide the kind of opportunity to learn what's necessary to really do low carbon construction effectively. There are other issues around what's being taught in the classroom component. One is the extent to which building science is forced, and other issues around theoretical concerns, and particularly understanding buildings as integrated systems, not a bunch of individual contracts or silos. So system thinking, teamwork, communication skills, these are all important components of a well-rounded apprenticeship program. The bottom line here is very simple, that net zero requires a much more highly trained workforce. We had a look at the extent to which climate issues were appearing in the Red Seal standards, the Red Seal being the template that's used in training programs across Canada for apprentices. And a survey that I did back in 2019, where I went through all of the Red Seal standards to see the extent to which climate-related or environment-related issues were included in the standards. And this is what apprentices need to know in order to pass the Red Seal exam. And what we found was basically there was almost no information about climate literacy or about climate change in the Red Seal standards. So that's a big gap that we saw as being something that needed to be addressed. In fact, it was only in the summer of 22 that the Red Seal Secretariat actually issued a statement, a good statement actually, saying that climate change, something that now should be included front and center in the apprenticeship curriculum. So that's a good step forward. Maybe it came a bit late, but something that shows that we're moving in the right direction. We did a lot of interviews, and one of the outcomes of that is that we found that the current training system, particularly that done by the building trades unions, is very good at teaching workers how to do many of the technical aspects of the job. But it's not training workers or apprentices about the why, and in particular in terms of climate change, why the industry and its workforce can play such a major role in addressing the climate crisis down the road. So knowing why is a very important element, we think, in terms of what needs to be included in the curriculum. And that includes both the environmental impact of the work that people do, but also the reality that if you are doing something that you understand to be a positive contribution to making our society better, to addressing the climate crisis, this too can be a major source of job satisfaction for workers. You're doing something that is important for your community. So all of that needs to be sort of melded into the programs. Now, I'll jump over here to the union role in apprenticeship, which is very significant in Canada. The project that we've been involved in is working with 14 affiliates of Canada's building trades unions, and all of them operate training facilities. There's 195 across the country, and their annual budget is about $300 million. So I just mention that to give you a sense of the significance of the training contribution of the building trades unions. These facilities are funded in part by payroll contributions of employers and union members, and also with some support financially from both federal and provincial governments. And overall, in English Canada, the construction trades train roughly 30% of our construction workforce, which is a very significant component of it. One of the strengths of the union system is that the unions have contracts with employers, and when an apprentice is indentured with the unions, the union itself has a responsibility to try and ensure that that apprentice gets the work that is needed to eventually complete the apprenticeship. So moving on to our project, the project is hosted by the Canadian Building Trades Unions, and the way this got started is that CBT met with some of the vocational education developers if it might be feasible to develop a proposal for funding from the federal government and to look at the whole issue of what can be done to incorporate greater climate literacy into the curriculum of the apprenticeship programs, and also provide also climate literacy for working trades and in some cases for pre-apprenticeship programs. The idea here was to try and build modules that could be incorporated into the existing trades training programs. They would be part of the curriculum, and that would be something then eventually, and don't want to be presumptuous about the red seal, but eventually some ideas, concepts of the curriculum that we're developing would filter into the way in which the red seal was signaling to instructors as to what should be taught in the classroom. And again, one of the things that we was to ensure that the modules reinforce the fact that workers can play a very significant role in addressing our climate crisis. This slide that you're seeing now gives you a sense of the various unions in the Indian Building Trades Union. Won't go through each of the different unions, but you get a sense of the broad scope of those who are involved in this project. In terms of how the project is structured, project governance involves funding, which we're grateful, obviously, from Employment and Social Development Canada, the federal government agency, and that funding flowed through to the Canadian Building Trades Executive, and they set up an advisory committee to oversee the project, representing the 14 different trades. And then underneath that, in terms of the structure, there's a climate and industry research team. That's the group that I'm part of, that I introduced at the beginning. There's a separate organization called Skill Plan, which is run out of British Columbia. Actually, it's quite a large organization that does vocational education and training for construction industry across North America. And it's jointly managed by the unions and employers in British Columbia. And they have been around for many years, literally thousands and thousands of training across North America. And then the third organization that we brought in as part of this project was the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation. We were concerned that what we developed in terms of the curriculum was actually going to have some impact, and therefore you need to have some measuring what actually curriculum that you're developing, having some effect in terms of people's attitudes, ultimately of what is going on job sites as well. And there's just a screenshot from the Canadian Building Trades Union website. And center right, the Building It Green initiative, you can go on the website there and dig down into our research, which is published there, and also links to other components of the research involving the actual curriculum. And if any of you are interested in actually exploring this further, I can link you to the folks at Skill Plan in particular who have themselves been developing the details of the curriculum. So I very briefly went over the organizational structure, so I don't need to say more about that now. But our group is a climate and industry research team. It's the academic component of this project. And we have people who are involved in vocational education and training from universities in Europe and the US and Quebec and also English Canada. And our function was basically initially to look at the climate science and make sure that we had a good sense of how that was impacting the building industry and its workforce. And that normally, as you would appreciate, involves the literature search and contacting people who are knowledgeable about this area. And then we looked more specifically at what was being included on climate literacy in the apprenticeship programs and other training programs for the construction trades in Europe, in the US, and also in Canada. So and from that, we wanted to extract the most promising material dealing with climate issues that we would then be able to use in the development of the curriculum that we wanted to put in place. I should mention also that our curriculum is not just for apprentices. We separate involvement in terms of providing background material that instructors need, some of whom are not as comfortable dealing with climate issues in classroom, that they would need, they would need background and well, so it's not just apprentices. In terms of the Building It Green curriculum, there are two kinds of components. One is an online foundational course that we've developed that all construction trade, all apprentices that is, and that is an online process. The current one is about 2 hours long that you can take, and you can find out both about what's happening to the climate, that's important, and also what's happening in terms of its impact on the building sector. And that is being developed so that it encompasses the whole of the construction industry. In terms of the 14 trades that are part of CBTU, we're also doing separate modules that would focus on what those individual trades should know with respect to how climate is affecting them, and also what they might be able to do on the job site dealing with addressing the climate. And that's led to the development of a package of workbooks and many videos actually that are part of the program. Train the trainer workshops. So we've been meeting instructors in the debates, fine tune, and also we've been working on developing what we describe as on-the-job tools and supports for work. So as I mentioned, our target audience is apprentices, both in terms of the foundation module and also the training, and also for trades instructors, so they have the background. Objectives, and I have a lot of time on this slide, but basically so that there is an awareness of the importance of also a better understanding of how buildings are integrated systems, hopefully also influencing views around the benefits and the positive side of moving towards net zero, so forth. And in terms of the longer term goals, we're looking at how this is eventually translate, both in terms of attitudes towards climate issues in the sector, and also ultimately in terms of what's going on job site. So in terms of the current status of the project, we have finished the climate literacy modules for all the trades, and Skill Plan in particular is very good at developing curriculum material. They've got lots of experience. So there's lots of nice little videos that have been built into the curriculum. And all of this has been going through the vetting by the advisory committee so that we're sure that it's relevant, goes into the trades. We've also had the actual curriculum modules translated French, so they're also available here. And in terms of the status, we're doing a lot of testing right now at different locations across Canada with instructors to see back is also social demonstration, doing evaluations, surveys of the apprentices and instructors, again, to see how the curriculum is actually impacting them. And this is just an example of some of the manuals that we have developed. So we're doing these for every trade, the 14 trades. One is a trainer's guide or an instructor's guide with information how to be able to teach. Then there's for the actual, a lot of detail, skill plan in particular, a lot of work on this. Finally, I have 1 minute on my last slide, isn't that lucky? So what can I say? Key findings, and obviously a lot more that we've found, but basically there's a big problem in terms of the adequacy or rather inadequacy of employers supporting the training system. High performance, net zero construction can't be performed qualified workforce. That's because hard that needs to be successful in the impact of sector. Workers need a very broad knowledge of the building process, how their work relates to that of other trades and occupations, a more holistic understanding. Our vision in the also ways in which they can work. Could also focus on encouraging morality and outcome, following orders, but also the goal and climate. So the apprenticeship program should be really focusing on the development, knowledge, skills, and competencies of the work, job satisfaction that can flow from just the last point I make on the system really needs to recognize that workers have a legitimate interest in having an occupation, proud in advertising, and that we should development as a pathway, moving away from construction just being a set of short-term jobs, but rather a proper career. But that's